Just a couple weeks ago, we looked at Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which was the first ever animated Spider-Man film. And today, we're going to look at the first live-action Spider-Man film, called Spider-Man, released in 2002. And much like with Into the Spider-Verse, thank you Blade for using your points to make this review happen. Development on live-action Spider-Man films first started in the 1980s, but due to a lot of licensing and financial issues, this was in development hell for almost 25 years. We finally got somewhere, however, when Columbia Pictures got the rights in 1999. David Cope was brought on to do the screenplay. In terms of box office numbers, he's actually the 9th most successful screenwriter of all time. In addition to this, he also wrote Jurassic Park, Jurassic Park 2, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Mission Impossible, Jack Ryan, War of the Worlds, among others. And Sam Raimi was brought on to be the director, who is also well known for directing the Evil Dead franchise. And the role of Spider-Man was filled by Tobey Maguire, who after getting some breakout roles in the late 90s, early 2000s, truly rose to stardom with this one. Also casting included Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn, Kristen Dunst as Mary Jane Watson, and James Franco as Harry Osborn. And I'm sure you don't need me to tell you, but obviously this film centers around the origin story of the superhero Spider-Man. On a massive budget of $139 million, it did very well at the box office, making back $825 million, at the time the 6th highest grossing film ever. Funny enough though, it was only the 3rd highest grossing film of 2002, behind Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets and Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. 2002 was a very good year for film. It was also, of course, acclaimed by critics and audiences alike, and it resulted in 2 sequels, Spider-Man 2, which many believe surpassed this film in terms of quality, and Spider-Man 3, which definitely existed. So how were the origins of Spider-Man told in this film? Well, we're gonna find out right now as we look at Spider-Man, released in 2002. So we begin our film by meeting Peter Parker, a high school senior who's a bit of a stereotypical nerd. He and the rest of his class are on their way to Columbia University to look at a genetics lab. And outside the university, he meets up with his best friend Harry Osborn and his father Norman. Norman is a bit of a scientist himself and also the founder and owner of Oscorp, a chemical corporation who's currently trying to secure an important military contract. Inside the chemical lab, they're shown some genetically infused super spiders. Peter also makes small talk and takes the picture of his crush, Mary Jane Watson, who's dating the school bully Flash. While he's taking pictures of her, one of the genetically enhanced spiders, which got loose somehow, lands on Peter's hand and bites him. Meanwhile, remember how I mentioned that Oscorp military contract? Well, they're trying to get it by providing the US military with a weaponized glider and advanced armor, as well as a performance-enhancing chemical, which unfortunately they haven't perfected yet. And they're running out of time, as the general informs Norman that he has 2 weeks to perfect it or else he's gonna get his funding pulled. Meanwhile, Peter goes home where it's revealed he lives with his Uncle Ben and his Aunt May. That bite on his hand's looking a little bit bigger, and Peter's feeling really sick. And then we get a mini montage showing how the spider bite is reshaping his DNA. Back at Oscorp, they really need to do that trial for that advanced chemical, so Norman decides, screw it, I'm just gonna test it on myself. His assistant's like, hey, maybe don't do this, but Norman's like, nah, it'll be fine. The chemical's ingested using a gas chamber, which seems to apparently kill Norman. But it didn't kill Norman. In fact, it's turned him into a completely insane monster, and he murders his assistant. Speaking of changes, Peter wakes up the next day to notice that he no longer needs glasses, and he's kinda buff now. He then looks for his window and spies on Mary Jane, who happens to live right next door to him, which definitely isn't creepy. Feeling great, he's eager to go to school, and Uncle Ben reminds him that he has to come home early to paint the kitchen. Peter then sees Mary Jane have a fight with her dad, and while he tries to run her down, he misses his bus. And in trying to catch the bus, his hand gets stuck to a paper on the side of it. Back at the Osborn house, Harry finds his dad passed out in his study. Norman doesn't seem to remember what happened, and then he's informed by someone else that his assistant is dead and someone has stolen the flight suit and the glider. Meanwhile, at school, Peter further demonstrates his new abilities, including awesome reflexes as he catches a slipping Mary Jane and her food. He then accidentally shoots a spider web from his hand and accidentally flings a lunch tray into the back of Flash. He then goes to his locker to try to open it, and Flash comes up behind him and tries to punch him in the back of the head because he's a pussy, but using his new spider sense, Peter hears it coming. Peter then dodges all of Flash's punches in rapid succession and punches him straight across the room, which according to Mary Jane somehow makes Peter the asshole? Fucking what? Peter then runs in the city to further test his new abilities, and turns out, using his sticky hands, he can climb up buildings. He can also jump across them, and he gets the technique down to shoot his webs. And that's one of the big differences of this Spider-Man compared to a lot of other Spider-Mans. In a lot of Spider-Man adaptations, Spider-Man uses a web shooter, while with this Peter Parker, it just naturally comes out of his body. Anyway, Peter goes a web slinging until he runs into a billboard and gets home really late, missing the painting of the kitchen. Later that night, Peter goes to take out the trash, and Mary Jane Watson comes outside after having another fight with her dad. He apologizes to her from earlier when he committed self-defense, and then they talk about their futures, with Mary Jane revealing that she wants to be an actress. Peter's not sure what he wants to do, but he definitely feels different. Before the conversation can go any further, Flash shows up with his brand new car and whisks Mary Jane Watson away. Peter then decides that's what I need to impress her, some new sweet wheels. He then sees an ad for an amateur wrestling match where if you win, you can get $3,000. He then gets to work on starting to drum up some costume ideas. Meanwhile, things are not going very well for Norman Osborn, and also he's hearing voices, which isn't great either. The next day, Uncle Ben takes Peter into town and tries to have a heart-to-heart with him about him changing, and tells him with great power comes great responsibility. And Peter basically responds by saying, "Fuck you, old man, you're not my real dad." So how exactly do you win that $3,000? Well, basically you have to beat the champion named Bonesaw, who is played by Macho Man Randy Savage. And it appears that Bonesaw is ready, and I hope Peter's ready too, because he's up next. He tells the ring announcer that his name is the Human Spider, and the ring announcer's like, "That name sucks, I'm gonna call him Spider-Man." Peter's match with Bonesaw is for whatever reason a cage match, which was not spelled out previously, but luckily that gives Peter a chance to hide. After Peter engages in some casual homophobic taunting, Bonesaw beats him up with a chair. Peter then starts to fight back, however, with some up kicks and knocks Bonesaw out by flip push-kicking him into the cage. However, afterwards, the promoter cheats Peter out of the money, only giving him $100 instead of the $3,000 because the ad said you have to last 3 minutes, and Peter got him in 2, which, Jesus Christ. The promoter then gets robbed, and Peter has an opportunity to stop the thief, but he doesn't because, much like the promoter said to him, he misses the part where that's his problem. Little did Peter know, though, that's going to end up being the biggest mistake of his entire life, as outside it appears someone was shot, and that someone is Uncle Ben, who is here to pick him up. Uncle Ben then dies in front of Peter, and Tobey Maguire cries in a way that definitely would not become a meme 20 years later. It's now big rage time, and Peter tracks down the killer who has stolen the car, and corners him in an abandoned building. After kicking his ass a little bit and taking his gun, he realizes that yep, it's the same guy he let go. The guy then tries to back up to get away from Peter and trips over a pipe, falls out the window, and fucking dies. After Peter goes home and tells Aunt May what has happened, we go to Quest Aerospace, which has gotten Norman Osborn's military contract. And as they're testing their flight suit, however, someone in the Oscorp suit and the glider comes up and blows the whole thing up and kills them all. We then move forward a little bit in time where Peter and his class have graduated high school. And at the graduation, Harry notices Flash break up with Mary Jane Watson. Afterwards, Peter and Aunt May have a heart-to-heart in Peter's bedroom where Aunt May tells him that he's destined for great things, and Uncle Ben would support him in whatever it is he wanted to do. Peter then pulls out his Spider-Man suit, which he hasn't touched since the night Uncle Ben died, and also his designs for a new one. And thus he completes the suit, which looks fucking awesome, officially branding himself Spider-Man and stopping crime throughout the city. And everyone seems to love him. Well, not everyone. J. Jonah Jameson, the publisher of the Daily Bugle newspaper, wants maybe some dirt and definitely some pictures of him. Meanwhile, Peter, who's just been fired from his job at a lab working for a Dr. Connors, meets up with MJ in the city, who's now working as a waitress. She also reveals to him that she's dating Harry, which Harry didn't tell him about. Peter goes to see Harry but fails to confront him on it, but then sees that ad in the paper about pictures of Spider-Man. After stopping crime, Peter takes some photos of himself and then sells them to Jameson, who gives him a job as a freelance photographer. Meanwhile, for Norman Osborn, things are still not going very well, as his board of directors have gone behind his back to sell his company to Quest Aerospace, and he is not allowed to be part of the deal to avoid a power struggle and has to resign. The next day at a parade held by Oscorp, the man who stole the Oscorp glider and suit shows up. The person's then pretty much revealed to be Norman, and getting revenge, murders the board of directors. He accidentally also knocks out his own son, who was on the platform, as well as Mary Jane Watson, who's about to fall. After Peter, who is transformed into Spider-Man, screws with his glider, he's able to save Mary Jane Watson at the last second before she falls. And later that night, Harry finally spills the beans to Peter that he is dating Mary Jane Watson and emphasizes to Peter that he never made a move, which roughly translates to, lol, get cucked soy boy. The next day at Norman's house, it's revealed that he has developed split personality disorder, the other personality being what Jameson is dubbing the Green Goblin. And the Goblin tells Norman that the only thing stopping them is Spider-Man, and they need to get Spider-Man to join them. Speaking of Jameson, Goblin bursts into his office and demands to know who it is it's taking pictures of Spider-Man. And in what is probably Jameson's best character moment of all three movies, he refuses to give up Peter's name. Peter as Spider-Man then confronts the Goblin, who hits him with some sleeping gas and abducts him. The Goblin offers Peter a partnership in which they will rule the entire city, but Peter's like, nah son, the Goblin's like, alright, you asked for it. Meanwhile, Mary Jane Watson is being absconded by a group of street thugs, who get quickly beat up by Spider-Man. It's also raining, and that wet t-shirt is pretty much why this movie was rated PG-13. And as a reward for saving her again, Mary Jane peels back a little bit of Spider-Man's mask to kiss him. The next day, there's a building on fire, and Spider-Man saves a baby. Turns out there's someone else still in the building, a crying woman, but that's not any crying woman, it's actually the Green Goblin. They fight for a bit and Peter ends up getting cut on the arm, which is about to become very significant. That's because Peter, Norman, Harry, Mary Jane, and Aunt May are all about to have Thanksgiving dinner together. And at the dinner, Norman actually meets Mary Jane for the first time, kinda weird that they just met just then. Peter initially tries to come in from upstairs, but almost gets found out by Norman after some blood drips off the ceiling. He then goes outside, beats an old lady with a stick for some cranberries, and returns for the front door with them. And while Norman's about to carve the turkey, he sees the cut on Peter's arm, realizing that Peter is the Spider-Man. Norman then decides he has to go, and Harry tries to stop him, and then Norman insults the fuck out of MJ, just implying that she's a gold digger. Harry then, for whatever reason, kinda takes Norman's side, and Mary Jane storms out, and Thanksgiving is fucking ruined. Later that night, Norman talks to the Goblin, and Norman doesn't want to hurt Peter, but he has no choice, and the Goblin decides they need to hurt someone close to Peter. Goblin decides that person obviously has to be Aunt May, so he blows up her house and nearly kills her. While Peter's at the hospital with Aunt May, Mary Jane shows up to visit, where she starts gushing over her admiration for Spider-Man. Peter then kinda puts the moves on her, and MJ grabs his hand right as Harry walks through the door. That's what we call reverse cucking. Harry then goes home to talk to his father, distraught, telling him that he believes that MJ and Peter are in love. And in telling him that, the Goblin now knows what Peter's biggest weakness is. Peter, meanwhile, is talking to Aunt May, who convinces him to make something with Mary Jane, as literally everyone knows how he feels about her. And Peter's like, oh shit, everyone? And he goes to call MJ, but he gets the Goblin on the other line. The Goblin has brought MJ to the top of a building where he plays a very sadistic game as Spider-Man shows up. He's also commandeered a railway cart that has a bunch of kids on it, and Peter has to choose. He's gonna drop them both at the same time, and he has to either save the kids or save MJ. But because Peter's a fucking legend, he's able to grab both of them and lower them onto a conveniently placed barge. Enraged, the Goblin throws Peter through another abandoned building, where they begin to fistfight. The Goblin's about to kill him, but Peter then hulks up and gets the upper hand, nearly beating him to death before the Goblin takes off his mask and reveals his identity. Norman begs for his life and tries to tell Peter that he has no control, while suddenly he prepares the glider from behind to impale Peter. He then tells him Godspeed, Spider-Man, but he does have Godspeed, and Norman does not, and he's impaled by his own glider, which kills him. Peter, because he's a dork, takes Norman's body home and puts him on his own bed as Harry walks into the room, thinking that Spider-Man killed his dad, which successfully lays the groundwork for the next two movies. And at the funeral, Harry swears vengeance upon Spider-Man. Peter then speaks to Mary Jane, who professes her love to him, and they make out. However, Peter realizes the only way to keep her safe is to cuck her, and memes on her feelings. As he walks away, he repeats Uncle Ben's words to him. With great power comes great responsibility, accepting his new great responsibility and great power as Spider-Man. And in the post-credit scene, just kidding, there isn't one. We're about 6 years away from that becoming a regular occurrence. I'm very happy I was able to do this film on the channel because it has a very special place in my heart. This film came out probably when I was about 5 years old. I probably saw it for the first time when I was around 7. I think it's the first superhero movie I've ever seen. And what a great superhero movie to start on, you know? Like, it's not perfect in terms of, comic adaptation, and maybe, Tobey Maguire is a little bit too old for the role. Do I care? No. a lot of people don't care either, because this was so many people's childhood, and no matter how bad the third movie was, which we'll get to eventually, this is just unshakable. And this movie, to be honest, kind of ended up shaping everything. At the time, before this movie came out, the highest grossing superhero movie was Michael Keaton's Batman in 1989, and this movie made twice that. I mean, if this doesn't do as well as it does, imagine if this flopped and nobody cared. Do we get everything that's happened since? Do we get the MCU and the DCEU and the whatever the fuck EU and all that? Does any of that, for better or for worse, happen without this film? I'm not entirely sure. This was crucial. Maybe the most crucial superhero film of the 21st century, because you could argue nothing happens if this isn't successful. So I'm not saying this is the most important superhero movie of all time or anything, but actually, yeah, I think that is what I'm saying. This might very well be the most important superhero movie of all time. And not just with superhero movies, but with film too. This is actually also largely credited with helping redefine the summer blockbuster craze, which is a little weird because this came out in April, but whatever. And with all that being said, would I put this on my list of greatest films ever? Honestly, yeah. I mean, I know some people, give it to superhero films, but I mean, come on. Like, this is one of the most influential, in my opinion, the most influential live-action superhero film of all time. And, I mean, this is everything, really, as far as what was created with superhero films in the 21st century. So yeah, I put this on this list. If you're looking to watch some of the greatest films of all time, you have to include this in that. And if you like superhero movies, well, I mean, I imagine you've already watched this. But if you haven't, well then, the fuck are you doing? But that is going to do it for my Spider-Man look back at Spider-Man. Thank you again, Blade, for using your points on this. I appreciate it. Next week, we will be looking at a movie called Bully, which came out a year before this in 2001. But that is it for me today. Thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to leave a like. If you didn't like it, don't. If you want to follow any of my social media links, they are all in the video description down below. Thank you to all my Patrons, also named in the video description, for supporting me and all my channels. I appreciate you guys. With all that being said, though, my name is Noah Taff. This has been my Spider-Man look back at Spider-Man, released in 2002, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.